Before I begin this review, we would like to add a bit of a disclaimer. This unit was provided to us by KZ Official Store via Lazada, and we would like to thank KZ Official Store for sending this unit to us. It's very helpful, and it's quite unexpected, really, being sent a unit, a KZ unit, knowing our history with a lot of KZIMs. In short, we don't really like a lot of KZIMs. A lot of them are garbage, but some of them are decent. And this is one of the most impressive KZIMs that I've ever come across. So it's a bit more impressive than the KZ EDX. It's a bit more impressive than the KZ ZEX, to be completely honest. And yeah, it's one of these weird KZs that actually kind of work, but they usually, somehow they kind of work for some reason. It's weird. Okay, the thing is, if you've watched another KZ review, I've always repeat the 4 mistakes of KZIMs usually is around bad quality bass, incoherencies, a horrible tonal balance, and ear bleeding amounts of treble. So usually KZs would have all 4 of these. Examples of KZs that have all 4 of these are the ZSN Pros, the ZS10 Pros, the DQ6. The DQ6 don't have an ear bleeding amount of treble, but it's still a lot of treble. So yeah. The ZSTs, the ZEXXX, of course you have a lot of KZs right like that. But with the ZES, the previous review, I don't know if I've released that one or released this one first. The ZES actually fixed 2 of the problems, which are the tonal balance. Surprisingly, it actually fixed quite a bit of the tonal balance and the ear bleeding amounts of treble, because the ZES is a very tonally sound KZ. So it's very good in terms of its tonal balance for a KZ, and it's average, I guess, in terms for overall IEM. You still do have slight bit of problem with the presentation of mid-range. But yeah, it's a very solid KZ in terms of tonal balance and treble control, I guess. And with this, it actually fixed the former 2 problems, which is bass quality, although it still has a few oddities, or not oddities, weaknesses in the bass, but it's definitely better than, it's going to be a bit better than most KZs out there. So yeah, although it's not the most impressive bass, it's better than most KZs, so yeah. And it also fixed the second part, which is coherency, which is weird in my opinion, because this has 2 very different drivers. I don't know if they actually work at the same time, like work together as one, or they work separately like a usual dynamic driver NBA hybrid. But this KZ has a piezoelectrostatic and a dynamic driver, and they are weirdly coherent sounding. So yeah, good job KZ, I guess, for that. Yeah, they're somehow very, very coherent sounding. Yeah, which is peculiar, because KZs can barely do any good with dynamic driver and BAs, but with electrostatics, for some fucking reason, they do very well. So yeah, good job KZ for that. And then with the overtonal balance and the treble region, they don't have an ear bleeding amount of treble, but they do have a lot of peaks there, which isn't very pleasant. So I would see that they still have the treble problem. And with the tonal balance, I still think the ZEXXX is better in terms of tonal balance here, and it's quite significant. If you listened to a lot of a what do you call it, more instrumental type of music, I would guess that you would not really think that these have anything wrong with its overall tonal balance. But when you listen to vocals, you would notice slight problems. It's not even slight, it's actually noticeable problems in the tonal balance. So yeah. And if you actually listen to a lot of guitar tones, you do still notice quite a bit of problem in its lower mid-range region. We'll get to it later. So overall, it's a very decent sounding IM, and it's quite interesting to be like this. It's not supposed to be this good coming out from a KZ. So it's very competitive in my opinion in terms of actually technical performance. Well, we'll get to that later then. So that's basically a TLDR. So with build quality, I've never had a problem with KZ in their build quality. I think a lot of KZs are usually mostly well built, and the ZEX, the ZEXXX is also one of the KZs that is very well built. And yeah, I don't have a lot of problems with the build, and the cables are actually not as bad as the original KZ Brown cables. It's that type of a tube-ish, like plastic tube-ish type of build, but it doesn't tangle as hard as the original Brown cable. So it's decent, to be completely honest. It's quite decent. The ear hooks, however, is not very complementary to my ear, so I do have quite a bit of problem fitting to this cable. For the ear tips, you get the new type of ear tips, the very soft ear tips. There are two types of ear tips. They're rounder, more regular shaped ear tips. Oh, the camera is here. And the tube looking ear tips, like the squarish shape. I find the squarish shape to be better sounding and actually better fitting to my ears. The better sound might be because of the better seal that I can get with them. So yeah, it's a decent ear tips. It's very soft. If you don't like very soft ear tips, you might have a problem with it. I have actually quite a bit of problem fitting to the rounder shaped ones, but with the tube-ish shaped one, it's definitely very fine, I guess. So yeah, for overall tonal balance, it's for overall tuning in general, it is a V-shaped sounding IM. It's not the regular Hi-Fi V-shape, but it's kind of like the Hi-Fi V-shape. It's actually a bit better than the original, maybe the ZS10 Pros or the ZSN Pros type of tuning, but it's still not perfect, definitely. You have a lot of problems there, we'll get to that now. For the bass region, I think it's decent. Overall, it's decent. It's a quite a noticeably faster bass than the usual KZ you're gonna get. It's a bit cleaner. It's not the punchiest type of bass that you're going to get. It's a bit less punchy than the one in the ZAS, a bit less punchy than the ones in the ZS10 Pros. It's a bit less punchy. It's definitely less dynamic than the ones in the Rico SG01s. Considering the major difference of the bass with the bass level of the ZEXXX and the Huzzy Hard Mirror, I think the Huzzy Hard Mirror is a bit more dynamic too. The bass on the Blonde 03 is a bit punchier too, and the ones on the Showa tapes is a bit punchier too. By the way, I haven't introduced them yet. This is the Rico SG01, this is the Showa tapes, it's the Blonde 03s, and the Huzzy Hard Mirror is going to be a comparison for the ZEXXX. The most expensive IM on the table is going to be the Showa tapes, and the reason for them to be here is because it's also a piezoelectrostatic. I actually listened to the CCA NRAs, and we'll be talking about the CCA NRAs too in this review. So yeah, for overall tonal balance, it's fine. It's a bit warmish. It's a bit slightly warmish, V-shaped sounding. So yeah. For bass, continuing with the bass, it's not very well contoured in my opinion. You do have a significant, in my opinion, a bit too significant elevation in the upper bass region and the lower mid region. So it's kind of bleeding, but doesn't bloat. It's not the bloated bass sounding that you're going to find on the Blonde or Freeze. It's different, but it kind of bleeds and kind of muddies up the lower mid range a bit because of the lack of because it doesn't roll off as fast to the mid range. I would prefer them to be what do you call it? It's not contoured very well. It has to be a bit too much elevation in the lower mid range and the upper bass region. So yeah, it's a decent sounding bass. It's a decent sounding bass. It digs down to the sub bass, unlike the NRAs. So yeah, it's a very decent type of bass presentation. Although with that type of too much elevation in the lower mid range and the upper bass, it might get muddy in the with the vocals. And coming in with the mids is somewhat withdrawn sounding. It's not very forward. You do have that type of pulled back presentation in the mid range. For male vocals, it's actually not very bad. You do have a bit more body with the extra lower mid range and upper bass region, but with female vocals, it sometimes bothers. The dipping in the mid range sometimes bothers some female vocals, but not all. When male and female vocals sing together, plays together at the same time, I find that usually the male vocals would overpower or would smear the female vocals. So yeah, you do have a bit of problem with the instrument separation in the mid range because of that extra elevation on the lower mid range and upper bass. It's not usually instrument separation. It might be because like the vocal separation, I guess. So yeah. And with that, it's not the most perfect sounding mid-range. The upper mid-range Pina gain's actually not bad, but it does have the usual 2K KZ peak, but it's somewhat of the character of the KZ. So if you like a KZ IM, it's definitely a KZ sounding mid-range. So yeah. And with that, we go to the treble. Treble is filled with peaks, in my opinion. It's filled with peaks. It's not a very intense peak. It's not very there is no significant protrusion on the treble region, but it's definitely brighter than what I would like to consider neutral, and what I would actually prefer them to be. It's actually a bit brighter than what I prefer them to be. The extension here is fine, in my opinion. It's not the most well extended IM, but it's also not the darkest sounding too. So yeah, the extension to the upper treble is okay. It's very good too. And the way that the treble, the piezoelectrostatic generates the treble frequencies are also very good. It's quite smoother sounding. It's not very it doesn't have the distinct BA timbre to it, but it's a more of a ethereal, like smoother sounding electrostatic timbre that you can find in IMs like the Shure tapes. It's not real E-stat, actually. It's more of a magnetostat or something. But yeah, it's a decent presentation of a piezoelectrostatic IM. It's a decent implementation of the piezoelectrostatic treble region. So good job, Casey, for that. And for the cheap price of, I don't know, maybe $20-ish, you actually did very well. They actually did very, very well for it. So yeah, for that we go to the technical performance. The technical performance here is decent. To be completely honest, it's overall decent, but it does do very well in certain areas. For example, in detail retrieval is actually very, very good. It's very, very detailed overall. It's not going to be as detailed as the Hudson hard mirror, but it's going to be a bit more detailed than something like the Blonde 03s, the Triple-Point Mealies, and it's going to be about as detailed as the Ricoh SG01s. And it's actually a high praise for a very budget IM. It's a very, very cheap IM. It's around the price of BL03, so it's much more detailed than anything you can find under at around its price. So if you're going to find something more detailed than it, you're going to spend a bit more money, like for the Hudson hard mirror or the Tin T2s, or even to match it, the Ricoh SG01s, which is quite detailed for under $100, and it's actually quite a high price, so a bit more detailed than the Moondrop Starfields too. And yeah, it's overall a very detailed IM. So yeah, for its price, it's insane. It's immensely detailed in my opinion. And I already did the comparison against the ZAS, which I still find the ZEXX to be a bit more detailed than that too. And in terms of soundstage and image separation and layering and imaging, it's average in my opinion. It's not very wide, it's not very deep, it's not very well separated or very well imaged, but it's decent. It's just average. It's not really decent. It's more of an average type of spatial presentation. It's not as wide as a Blonde 03, it's not as wide as the Ricoh SG01, it's not as wide as the Hudson hard mirror. It doesn't have the depth and imaging of the Hudson hard mirror, but it's a bit sharper than the ones in the Blonde 03. So take it like that. So I guess it's a very good imaging for a very budget IM. So yeah, for dynamics, I find them a bit lacking in terms of overall macro dynamics. When I listen to this Hudson hard mirror, which is more than twice as expensive than the what do you call it, the Ricoh the ZEXX, I find that the way that the music is presented to you is a bit more dynamic, while the main instrument's a bit louder and in the background instrument's a bit softer sounding, but it's more detailed too. But with the ZEXX, they are a bit closer sounding, so you can actually listen to the background instrument easier with the ZEXX, but it's not necessarily more detailed. That instrument's not necessarily more detailed. So in terms of dynamics, it's a bit more compressed sounding than the Hudson mirror. Is a bit more compressed sounding than the Ricoh SG01s, and it's a bit more also compressed sounding than the BL03s. I forgot to mention with detail, I think the Shure tapes is still a bit more detailed than the ZEXX, but the ZEXX is kind of close in terms of overall detail. So actually quite a high praise for the ZEXX, because the Shure tapes is much more expensive than the ZEXX. It's over $100, and while the ZEXX is barely $30, like it's like $25, so it's very, very cheap for a very, very good amount of detail. It doesn't have the spatial presentation of the Shure tapes, of course, so, and dynamics of a Shure tape, of course, but it's fairly more coherent than Shure tapes. The Shure tapes are basically one of the worst IM in terms of coherency. So yeah, having a very coherent and detailed IM with an acceptable tonal balance is actually very good for the ZEXX. Comparing the ZEXX against the NRAs, in my opinion, when I first listened to the NRAs and comparing it with the ZEXX, I actually instantly liked the NRA a bit better. I think it's a bit more balanced sounding. It doesn't have that upper bass, lower mid-range honk, as maybe not as hard as the NRA and as the ZEXX, because that they have less mid and low and sub bass region. But after switching tips, and after I actually use the wider ear tips, yeah, I actually now favor the ZEXX better. I think it's a bit more balanced in terms of treble and bass frequencies. And with that, at first I actually can't fit to the rounder ear tips, as I've mentioned before. So I use the monoprice ear tips, and with the monoprice ear tips, you actually do get a bit more lower mid-range and upper bass with the ZEXX. So it sounds worse than using the stock tube-ish ear tips. So when I switched back to the stock tube-ish ear tips, they sound much better than the ones that I use when I use the monoprice. So actually ended up favoring the ZEXX over the NRAs. So yeah, it's a bit more balanced sounding, while the NRA is a bit brighter, and the NRAs is also as peaky, if not maybe worse, but it's not really worse, but it's about as peaky as the ZEXX in the treble region too. So yeah, it's a bit more balanced, I guess, the ZEXX. And in terms of overall technical performance, I can't find them to be different enough to be notable in terms of overall technical ability. So yeah, ZEXX is definitely a very good IM for its price. It's a definitely amazing IM for KZs. It doesn't really scale as much with bigger and more powerful amps, because these hiss like crazy. It hiss basically when you plug it into anything, literally anything. So you do have that problem with it. So I tried tubing these, and they sound phenomenal with tubes, but the hiss would ruin everything, I guess. So yeah, that's it for the review. Don't forget to watch Jason's video. See you next time. Godspeed.